Which creepy urban legend turned out to be true? I went to a university near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It used to be a POW camp and a military hospital before the college bought the entire property for $1 in the 1960s. Since there are really only 3 universities near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, it will not be hard to deduce which college it was. Lol. Anyways, there was a rumor that underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff was left abandoned in the abandoned sections of the college. Sure enough, it was true. We found a tunnel hatch under our carpet in our dorm room, 2 hatches on the first floor, furthest most first floor dorm room of each building. It was literally like stepping into 1945. Everything was preserved down there, and the tunnels were massive. We eventually ended up in an underground garage, where there were 4 Jeeps parked but all the tires had dry rotted. We realized this was actually beneath our soccer field. Anyways, the tunnels lead to the cafeteria, the admin building, every dorm, and then an old abandoned section of our campus that we had no way of entering topside. We soon realized this was a hospital/morgue when we got out of the tunnels and walked the floor. It was still like 1945. All the hospital beds were still there, the surgical curtains were still there. Hell, even the tools, like the scalpel, saw, pliers, etc., were still on their trays. It was like everyone all of a sudden up and left and nothing had been moved since then. The morgue still had its slabs and sometimes we would dare each other to slide in there for a period of time. But yeah, it was an urban legend on campus until 3 of us decided to risk expulsion to see if it was true. And it was. When I was a kid, my dad would take me and my brother to High Rock. It's a neat overlook and we could play on the rocks. It was fun, but also a little sobering, as much as things can be for kids, because a girl had died in a hang gliding accident, if I remember right. As you drive up to the parking lot for the overlook, the road continues on into the woods. We asked our dad where it went, and he told us that you'd be driving down the road and suddenly armed guards would pop out of the woods to stop you, because there was a secret government base there. That's the case, except it isn't really secret. It's Raven Rock, which is a nuclear bunker that can act as a remote Pentagon if the country is attacked. Cheney went there during September 11th, while Bush was taken somewhere else. You will be detained if you trespass on the property. I went back to High Rock a few years ago while visiting family, and while hanging out at the overlook a truck of teenagers showed up. They asked if I knew what was up the access road, and I told them Raven Rock, and not to keep going, because they'd be detained. They decided they wanted to check it out anyway. An hour later, when I left High Rock, those kids had not come back yet, so I figured they were getting there as chewed out by a soldier. Fun fact, Raven Rock is the headquarters of the Enclave in Fallout 3. This is, thankfully, a somewhat more light-hearted urban legend than a lot of the posted ones so far, so I'd heard several times from friends and whatnot hearsay tales about this creepy, near mythical shoelicker who resided in the Tampa area. Apparently, this dude would walk up to people in public spaces and would ask them about their shoes and ask to see the bottoms of them, and would then drop and do his best to lick the bottoms of the shoes before the person could step back down. Naturally, I thought that was just way too weird, and there was no way this wasn't just people making up some bullshit story. Then I ran into the guy at a taco truck. Skinny dude, longish hair, probably homeless from how he was dressed. Could have been 18, could have been 30. Walks up as I'm waiting for what turns out to have been the best taco I've ever had in my existence, a cochinita pibble, for the curious, and asks about the shoes I'm wearing. I'd just finished performing and was still wearing some Doc Marten boots and was more than a little soused. He asks if he can see the treads or something like that. I'm all confused and am like, sure, why not? And he drops to the floor, grabs my boot and starts licking away at the sole. I yelled at the dude, sort of kicked at him, and he scampers off. Weirdest faking interaction ever. Reddit. Welp, my highest Reddit comment is about a creepy homeless dude who licked my shoe while I was drunk and waiting for a taco. Fantastic. Throwaway. Since I tell this story IRL, there was an urban legend at my high school that one of the janitors quit because he saw a set of bloody footprints down the hallway. My bad, that was me. One day, I was staying late to complete a class project and dropped a heavy glass pane on my toe. It left a huge gash that I couldn't get to stop bleeding. Now, my school was the kind of place where having a shoe full of blood would get you a week's detention instead of a hospital visit, so I make sure to check around before I limped on home to bandage myself up. Our high school was a rectangle with a sunken library in the middle, so we had hallways that framed it. I was at one corner, and at the other end was the janitor finishing up mopping the hallway point. As soon as he turned the corner, I took off my shoes and socks, since they were so full of blood I couldn't properly walk, and walked down the hallway and out the door. This left a perfect trail of bloody footprints all the way until the hallway dried out, which happened to be exactly where the exit door was. As the rest of the story goes, he turned around when he heard the door close and found a trail of bloody footprints down the hallway with no one there to take responsibility. Dude quit on the spot. Sorry to freak you out, janitor. Ghosts aren't real, or at least don't do that. I went to school in a very well-to-do area, so of course there was nothing seriously wrong like murderers or rapists. But one story from elementary school stands out here. There were rumors that our school had a basement under the gym floor that contained torture equipment. People described it as racks, whips, chains, etc. This was of course denied by absolutely everyone at the school, and of course parents. Besides, our single-story school was built in the 1920s. How could it have a basement? Kids of course doubted the denial. If you jumped pretty hard on the gym floor, it sounded hollow. When I was in 5th grade, someone brought in a disposable camera and snuck away to the gym when nobody was using it during the lunch break. This was in the 1990s, so not much teacher supervision. A week later he came back with the developed photos. They were really blurry, grainy, and not good at all, because he was 10, but it was still enough. What was saw was actually shocking. The legends were true. There was a basement under the gym floor. Inside the gym storage room, there was a door to a boiler room, and inside the boiler room there was a staircase that led to a basement. Inside the basement there was what appeared, to us kids at least, to be torture equipment. There were whips, chains, racks, etc. Just as described. The kid showed his parents, who of course brought the photos to the school staff demanding to know what the deal was. The photos of course weren't good enough quality to see what the stuff actually was, so of course there were questions. The staff investigated and eventually brought us all into the gym for an assembly about the photos, which we had all either saw or were told about by other people. The school basement was storage from when the building used to be the city's high school more than 40 years ago. The school used to use weight benches, which explains the racks, for the sports teams. The school also had a very successful equestrian, horse riding, team, who would go to competitions. There also used to be a horse barn on the property, but it had been torn down. This explained the whips, ropes, and there were also saddles and other horse equipment. I don't remember all the details exactly. This was more than 20 years ago. They showed us some of the stuff that was down there, and then all the rumors were put to rest, but the legend of the elementary school's dungeon cemented itself in the school's history. The Bunnyman Bridge, which is somewhat true. Edit. By somewhat true, I mean it has a kernel of truth. The legend is below. From the Creepypasta Wiki, back in 1903, deep in Clifton, there used to be an asylum buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton. Pretty soon after the Civil War people started inhabiting the area, population-wise around 300 or so. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea of having an asylum miles down the road, so they all got together and signed a petition for the asylum to relocate elsewhere. The petition passed, and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Lawton Prison, a temporary facility for convicts to stay in until they are appropriately sentenced. In the autumn of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into the bus used to transport them to Lawton. Somewhere during the drive not too far from where they left, the driver had swerved to avoid something, and the bus had started to tip, and soon was rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured, but managed to escape the bus, and had fled into the night towards the woods. The next morning, a local police investigation had begun, and they begun rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, weeks into months. Everyone was recovered after 4 months except for 2 people, named Marcus A. Walster and Douglas J. Griffin. During the search for both men, the police found dead rabbits, all of them half-eaten and dismembered. Every now and then along their search point finally, they were to find Marcus dead by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand, he held a man-made hammer/knife-like tool, made with a sharp rock and a sturdy branch as a handle. They thought nothing of it, and didn't care how he died, only that he was apprehended, and they no longer had to worry about him. They had a name for Marcus, but later on they would realize they had named the wrong person. The Bunnyman point. Still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding dead half-eaten rabbits every so often, while the search went on. Eventually, they were to name Douglas the Bunnyman. From then on, months passed by and the police gave up their search. Everybody assumed the Bunnyman was dead by now, if not gone, so they went on with their small town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue, and starting to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids had gone over to the bridge that night to drink and do whatever kids their age in the early 20th century did. Midnight came around within minutes, and most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge point. Exactly at midnight, a bright light came from the bridge, right where the kids were. A few seconds later, they were all dead. Throats slashed with that same type of tool that was found next to the other escapee, Marcus. Not only were their throats slashed, but they were cut up and down their chests, gutted like fish. The Bunnyman then hung both of the boys from one end of a bridge with rope around their necks, hanging from the overpass with their legs dangling in view of any passing cars. The girl was hung the same way, on the other side of the bridge. This happened on Halloween in 1905. After that, they didn't see or hear anything from him for another year. Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remember the incident that had occurred 1 year ago at the bridge. His bridge, the Bunnyman's Bridge. That night, 7 teens were left remaining right before midnight at the bridge. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside the bridge while one, Adrian Hattler, had remained a good distance from the bridge, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. She was the only one to witness this, a dim light walking the railroad track just before midnight, stopping right above the bridge at midnight, then disappearing at the same time that a bright flash was inside the bridge. She heard the deafening sounds of terrified screaming coming from inside the bridge that lasted only seconds. Moments later, they were all hung from the edge of the bridge, in the same way as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, she ran home and refused to tell all of what she saw, just spattered words mixed with incoherent mumblings that the people of her town had to put together to come up with her story. No one understood it or believed her. They charged her with the teens' murders and locked her up in the asylum of Lawton. In 1913, the same thing happened with 9 teenagers, this time on a Halloween night once again. Adrian was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was too far gone to have a life, so she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of reported shock. No one knows what exactly she died of shock from, but supposedly she had died in her sleep, dreaming of that one dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunnyman had finally gotten to her. More murders were to take place, however, although after the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. 1943 rolls around, and 6 teenagers go strolling out on Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them dead, same way as all the others. Investigations took place, but as usual nothing was discovered. 1976, the same situation occurs, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that occurred since then was in 1987, 12 years ago. Janet Charletia was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween night had finally come, and they had gone driving out to enjoy the night after invading the children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 PM at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see it for themselves, and were to be the only ones who actually withstood the Bunnyman. They had waited around an hour or so it was nearly midnight when Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, jumping out the bushes and screaming, so she was already a little worked up. Midnight hits, and by this stage she is in a total panic. She's almost out of the bridge when the lights get really bright inside. When that happens, her body is halfway outside of the bridge. She sees her skin start tearing at her chest but nothing is piercing her skin. She manages finally to leave the bridge. Completely horrified, she hits a hanging body and knocks herself out. When she awakens, she discovers that she has been bleeding. She was lucky that the cut had just started and wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. She has been seen sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning just staring in the direction towards the bridge a couple of miles down. From then on, the story remains unshaded and unmoved. I live in a lower/middle suburb in a large city in middle America. Plenty of religious people, but for whatever reason not many superstitious people. My buddy grew up in the nicest neighborhood in the suburb with his parents, and always jokingly talked about the lights in the haunted house across the lake. He was a huge jokester and nobody ever took him serious enough to even ask for an explanation. Was at his house working on a project one night and he says something like the lights are going again. I asked for clarification, and he points toward the window and at a house across the small lake on a hilltop. I had seen the house many times previously, and although it was on the same small lake his house sat on, the entrance to the property was actually from another direction, probably a mile away. I asked what was significant about the lights. He said there was a house fire 5 years prior and gutted a large portion of the interior while killing the family that slept. He said the house hadn't been remodeled and it didn't have power. Probably a year later a small group of us were a little intoxicated one Saturday night and decided to go visit the house and find out once and for all if it had power. We endlessly debated this because it wasn't flashlights you occasionally saw, it was truly a lit house. The property had a very long and windy drive from the road, probably a mile or so, and the property was unkept, so the grass was probably 4 feet tall or so. As we got probably halfway to the house, in a vehicle, thank God, we encountered a very aggressive wolf standing in the middle of the road who seemingly didn't want us to pass. It was extremely alarming, because none of us had seen a wolf up close and it just wasn't something you expected to encounter, so close to a big city. After some light flashing and engine revving, we were able to scare it away. We arrived at the house, which was completely trashed and unkept. Without further incident. The home had clearly been broken into previously because the door hung from its hinges and was easy to push aside. The inside was incredibly creepy because not only was it an abandoned house, but was just as it had been when the fire swept through, and we all knew the inhabitants had died feet from where we were standing. We looked around for a bit and then remembered our original mission, power. We gathered around what appeared to be an undamaged switch and mostly undamaged part of the home. We flipped the switch, and nothing. Immediately, we all made eye contact, because we were all feeling the same thing. The best way to describe it was an ice cold wave of dread and almost hatred ran over all of us. It was almost a repulsed feeling, and we felt that we shouldn't be there. Without hesitation we walked to the door and left. I'm not really superstitious or anything like that, not even religious. But there was something in that house, and it didn't want us there. We never really talked about it again and definitely didn't tell anyone else. I had almost forgotten about it until I visited my friend who was in town visiting his parents a few months ago. I shit you not, the faking lights were on in that house. I don't think this is a well-known urban legend, or if it's considered one, but one of my best friends went to college up in eastern Ohio and claimed that there was this back road out in the woods/mountains where really weird things would happen to your car. I was up there visiting one weekend and we decided to go get some snacks and drinks. Some of our other friends came with us. This was probably 1 AM or so. On the way back, we made a detour to go drive on the road my friend had told us about. We were driving along for almost the entire length of this road and nothing had happened. Then, right as we pulled up to the stop sign at the end of the road to head back, the engine shut off, all the interior lights came on, and the doors slid open. It was a Ford minivan. Naturally we were freaking out, but after we calmed down a bit, we decided to loop back and try it again. After doing this twice, we discovered that it would only happen if the vehicle came to a complete stop. If we did a slow and go at the stop sign, nothing happened. I still have no explanation for this and haven't seen anything about it online. Crazy stuff. Edit. Sorry if the formatting is bad. I'm on mobile. Also, TLDR, drove on a creepy back road, and when we stopped to turn at the end of it, the engine shut off, and the interior lights came on and the sliding doors of the minivan opened, but only if we came to a complete stop at the stop sign. With apologies for the length, I'll share a story from my high school years, a story among my own friends, a personal urban legend. It's semi-true in that our idea of what happened was sort of a bastardization of the true story. So while it's not true, it's also not a story that turned out to be a completely fabricated bunch of crap. Either there was this old mansion that we all said was haunted. It was the kind of place where teenagers would try to break in on Halloween. It was a seriously messed up place. It looked like an old mental institution with bars on the windows, and the front yard was all run down. At the back was a huge built-in greenhouse, all glassed in, that overlooked the little bay/inlet there. Anyway, you didn't have to hear stories about it, true or otherwise, to get the sense that this wasn't a happy place or a place you wanted to be. Various people lived there at various points during the time I was aware of it, and the story I heard was during at least some of this period. People lived there for free, they only had to maintain the house and I guess pay utilities. Even still, people never lasted long. We like to think it was because it was haunted, but in reality, it was probably because the place was a dump and the kinds of people you'd get to be caretakers of your creepy dump of a mental institution are probably not the most reliable/sober/etc. Anyway, the story we used to tell among ourselves, not the actual truth, was that the guy who'd lived there had picked up a few hitchhikers, like in their teens or early 20s, and let them stay at his house. He turned out to be a psychopath, though, and ended up brutally butchering them all with a knife, largely in the greenhouse section, leading to this terrible image of a poor innocent victim being hunted among tall plants, with no real escape. The real story was that the man who'd lived there did pick people up and bring them home, notably, young men from the gay district, and that he was a pretty awful guy. But it was the young men who killed him, with the knife, in the front hall. A la clue. I wanted the real story back then, but without the internet, it was hard. I figured I'd have to go find microfilm of it or some sheet. Now I can Google it. There are photos of the crime scene, blood and stuff written on the walls, all that. When I knew the place, his estate still owned it, but couldn't get rid of it. In the end, the whole lot was sold, and condos were built. I assume those condos are haunted. I grew up near a small townish area known as Lake Eliza. It's mainly comprised of redneck homes grouped around said lake point. The story was, when the area was first established, the lake was originally named Fish Lake. There was a couple that owned one of the first houses to be built along the lake. Before being able to start a family, the husband died from unknown causes. The wife, Lady Eliza, grew very depressed after the passing of her husband. The only time anyone would see her is when she would take her dog out for a walk on the lake during winter time when everything was frozen over. One of the times she never returned from her walk. When locals went searching for her, they had found a hole at the center of the lake where she had presumably fallen under. They then changed the name of the lake to Lake Eliza in memoriam point. Over the years her house remained the only one still standing. It's now directly across from the town hall and has a nice path down to the lake. A lot of people claim the house to be haunted by her ghost, which is fun. That's not the real urban legend though. It is, however, the urban legend that drew me and my friends into checking it out. My friends and I, in our teens, were obsessed with ghost hunting. We checked out all the haunted places in our area. Gypsy's Graveyard, Circus Train Wreck, Salesian Prep School. We even looked for Diana of the Dunes. We partied at all the sites and never saw a thing. Nothing fazed us until we went to Lady Eliza's house. We went out there at night. There were 6 of us. A few stayed behind in the car that were too chicken to check it out. Me and 3 other friends decided to check the house out. The front door was boarded up, but we noticed a nearby window was exposed. We climbed in through the window and immediately the smell hit us. We were not quiet about it, which in hindsight was very dumb. We ventured in through the living room. One of my friends decided to wander and nobody thought anything of it. He didn't get very far. From the edge of the living room was a staircase in a hallway, and across from that the kitchen. My friend took one look in the kitchen and turned pale. He shined his flashlight at us to get our attention and said we have to go now. Our first reaction was to laugh at him, but the chance to mock him was quickly interrupted by a "what the fuck?" that came from upstairs. We booked it out, jumped into the waiting car, and told them to gtfo. While driving away we noticed an Escalade that came from the opposite direction pull up to the house. Lake Eliza is also not too far of a drive from a city that we'll just say used to hold the murder record in the United States. The rumor was that gangbangers would take victims to this house and drop them there. We didn't hear about this rumor until after the encounter. What my friend saw, and what I swear I caught a glimpse of while we were leaving, was several dead bodies lined up across the kitchen floor. We had stumbled upon the gangbangers at the worst possible time. The house may not have been haunted, but it sure as hell scared the piss out of me and my ghost debunker friends. From then on my friends and I have a natural distrust for Escalades and will ridiculously duck and hide if we see one cruising by. Living in Salt Lake City, Sugar House, I used to hear about the doll man, basically just a crazy man who would wander around the city with one of those my buddy type dolls that he would sing to. Stories varied from him being a child murderer or a pedophile to him having lost his kid in an accident and it drove him crazy, hence the dollar surrogate. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s working in the shop KO, imagine a Kmart then make it 20% shittier, when I actually met the guy. Sure as shit. He was always carrying around a 3-foot tall Cabbage Patch-esque doll that, if memory serves, always wore an outfit that matched the doll man. He'd talk to it and pretend to give it drinks from his thermos. Off-putting to be sure, but largely harmless. He would come in about once a week and just wander around the toy section for an hour or so. He avoided contact with any of the customers and would visibly shrink away if any member of staff asked to help him, so we all learned to just let him be. The only time I saw him be any kind of problem was one year during Christmas. He came down an aisle into the main thoroughfare and got a face full of big display of these porcelain dolls all dressed in preparation for a proper Dickensian Christmas. The man froze in his tracks, turned his doll away from the display, and started having a panic attack on the floor, swatting away anyone who came over to try to help him. He eventually scooched his way back down an aisle and managed to compose himself enough to beat a hasty retreat. In retrospect, I feel bad that I don't really know anything else about him. It feels dehumanizing to just call him the doll man. The satanic panic was somewhat real, at least in my area of South Texas. After the discovery of the gruesome sight across the border in Matamoros, Mexico, the area went into a panic with supposed followers of a mix of Palomeo and Santeria threatening to kidnap and sacrifice local school children. I was 9 at the time and schools in the area would corral us into cafeterias and gyms and force parents to head to schools and sign us out in person. A local church called the Church of Fire was burned down because it was thought to be a satanic church. It was a Christian church. On March 14, 1989, University of Texas at Austin student Mark Kilroy was kidnapped in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, while vacationing during spring break. He was taken by his abductors to a ranch, where he was tortured and sodomized for hours before being murdered in a human sacrifice ritual. Kilroy was killed with a machete blow and then had his brain removed and boiled in a pot. His killers then inserted a wire through his backbone, chopped off his legs, and buried him at the ranch along with 14 other people who had been killed there before him. Adolfo Constanzo, the leader of the cult, told his followers that human sacrifice granted them immunity from law enforcement for their drug smuggling operations. The killing drew worldwide media attention and initiated an international police manhunt because of the unusual circumstances of the crime. So this is just in my experience, not some kind of proven fact I guess, though I would love for someone to figure it out, because it's terrifying. There's a bridge near where I grew up in Bumpfuck, Tennessee, that is notorious for screaming at people at night. The screams aren't audible to the houses nearby and supposedly you have to sit on the actual bridge to hear it at all, though I personally haven't tested it or anything. The common explanation is that it's a bobcat that lives under the bridge, but people have checked with dogs and such and never find signs of any point. Well, some friends and myself had heard this story for years all growing up but never tested it. So one night after a few beers we get up the notion we are going to go test the thing. So 5 drunk guys pile into a beat up car and we drive down and park on the bridge. This is 1:30 a.m. and it's dead silent out. We sat there for a good 45 minutes and nothing happened. We had the windows down and had started debating whether or not it was all bullshit. When the scream happened, we had the lights off and there was a moon, so you could see pretty well and there for sure wasn't anything outside the car. But it was faking loud, and it sounded just like a woman with particularly powerful lungs having her skin ripped off right outside the window on the rear passenger side that faced off the edge of the bridge. Now I've heard bobcats in heat while hunting, and they do like a scream kind of thing. It's hard to describe, but they do it in little repeating bursts. This was a good 3 to 4 second extended scream at incredible volume. We tore out of there like a demon was chasing us. A couple of miles down the road we finally stopped and actually processed what happened. My adrenaline was going so badly, and I was so scared I was just shaking uncontrollably. One of my friends had actually pissed himself, which I'd never seen anyone actually do. One friend immediately left the car and vomited. To give what I think was a good frame of reference to how actually terrifying this was, my friend whose car we were in wasn't even mad at the friend that pissed all over his seat. It was insane. To this day I have no explanation for it. Bridge in question. This one is from my village in India, Nishidark. Apparently there is something that called people by their given name at night. It could call only twice for some reason. And if you would answer the call, you would find yourself walking into the nearby woods and people would find your horribly mutilated corpse later. Whatever it was, turned out to be true. However, no one found the serial killer. A holy man came to our village and performed a big ceremony with much pomp and show. Strangely, the murders stopped. The last victim was a brave woman who had been waiting with a sharpened sickle to kill the bastard. Her husband had died that way, to the fiend's call. However, we found her corpse the next day. She was not abused sexually, just strangled to death. The holy man visited our village soon after. Even today when I go back home to my family in India, we are told to strictly adhere to the following rules. Don't answer immediately when someone calls your name from outside at night. The fiend can only call twice, a human will call thrice or more. Answer only then. I went back home this January 2018. And according to reports the fiend is still active. But it only kills pets now. In the early 2000s I was stationed at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, TX. In the basement of our shop I was wandering around one day and saw what looked like a tunnel in a generator room. Rumor had it that the tunnels went all over that part of the base and connected all the buildings. They were apparently used to move animals back when they did research tests on them, so it wasn't obvious they were testing on animals. Well, one night, a buddy and I decided to explore, and we had to have spent an hour wandering around all these tunnels. We ended up finding out that the animal thing was all true, but that there was something even more secret. There was this one small brick building that I never saw anyone go into. Looked like nothing more than a storage shed or maintenance building where telephone cable would come up into, but being a telephone guy, I found it odd I never went in there. Well, as maintenance guys would have it, I came into possession of the long lost keys for this building. So another night we decided to go check it out. There was just some boxes and wood leaned against the wall, but when we moved it all out of the way, there was a freight elevator behind it. The power worked, and in we went. It seemed like we were on this thing for 10 minutes, but it was probably only a couple. Down it went into the pitch black. The only light coming from those cheap military issue flashlights. When we hit the bottom we were in a room, found a light switch, and they still worked. The fluorescent lights slowly flickered on like it was the first time they were powered up in 50 years. It was a small white room with a table and some chairs, nothing interesting left behind. Each side of the room had these heavy as lead-lined doors with glass in them about a foot thick. Going through the doors led to a small narrow room with metal shelving and racks and big thick windows looking into the main room. Only thing we could figure was that at one point, radioactive material had to be stored in there. No one on base knew anything about it or that it even existed, except a couple really old guys that had been working there since the 70s. Around the time I left I know the city bought the base and converted most of it to commercial real estate. Turk Man in Scotia, New York. There's an urban legend of a deranged man who for some reason was called Turk Man. Legend has it that one night, his wife and kid were killed on their countryish road by a drink driver in a red car. So every night, Turk Man patrols the road looking for red cars and the driver who killed his family. Funny thing is, my friend had a red car. One night we were high and decided to drive down the road to see if the rumor was true. We drove slowly and passed by without seeing anything. The road is dark and flanked by nothing but woods and the occasional house point. On our second pass, we saw someone point. It was a man wearing what looked to be a really short cut-off shirt, long hair, and he was carrying what looked like a giant stick. He had a hills have eyes type of look to him. We knew it had to be him. We slowed down, brave enough to try to say hi or something. That's when he immediately started charging at us. The stick was actually a shotgun. We peeled out probably as fast as we could in that little red Honda. I turned around and all I saw behind us in the darkness was the man sprinting full speed after us. It was definitely Turk Man, and we finally knew the stories were true. I never went down that road again since that night. Back in my senior year of high school, about 5 years now, a friend of mine had told me about this bridge near our hometown called Satan's Bridge. Its notoriety started with a man who hung himself there and haunts the area. Apparently a lot of satanic sacrifices were also being done there. People found dead animal carcasses with pentagrams underneath the bridge. Along with that, there have been sightings of hooded figures roaming the woods there. Anyway, many supernatural things occur there, and my friend told me about what happened to some people who went to our school. It was 3 upperclassmen who decided, go to the bridge, to see what it was all about. Now the road the bridge is on is called Berry Hill Road, and it is pitch black. It's easy to lose your signal there, and is an extremely wooded road. You have a breakdown there at night, good luck. The bridge itself is built over a fairly large river, and has been heavily graffitied over the years. Now apparently what happened was they decided to park their car on the bridge itself, and got out to look around. One of them looked down to the river, and could see a black shadowy figure walk along on the shore. He pointed it out and everyone could see it. They immediately got back in the car and drove away. Now apparently the guy in the passenger seat began acting funny and kept staring at the guy in the back seat through the rear view mirror. The guy in back asked why he kept looking at him, and the passenger said there was an old lady sitting beside him staring at him. The driver and backseat rider were both spooked like hell. At some point during the ride after that, the passenger tried to grab a knife that was in the center console, but luckily the driver grabbed it before he could get to it. He said he wanted to kill the lady, and after that he was pretty quiet. They drove to a friend's house and shit got weirder. When they went upstairs, apparently everyone could see the lady in one of the windows staring at them. Not long after, the passenger from before began spazzing out and spoke in some other language for 10 minutes straight. It took everyone to hold him down, and when he came to he couldn't remember anything at all. So fast forward to my friend currently telling me this story. We get the stupid idea to head over there to check it out. Around 1 AM on a cold February night, we got there and parked right before the bridge. I brought my camera with me and we walked to it. Like I said before, the road is wooded, so it was pitch black when we got out, but as soon as we stepped onto the bridge, you could see everything, even the fog coming off of your breath, if you exhaled hard enough. It was a full moon that night. I went ahead and started taking pictures with my flash on. At first nothing was showing up. I took pictures constantly, and then suddenly orbs began showing up. Some at first, then none at all, and then a lot. It was very inconsistent. At one point my friend said he didn't want to be there anymore and wanted head back. I said okay, just let me take one more. Took a shot, lots of orbs. He said alright man, enough. As soon as he said that I took another, nothing. Getting irritated, I immediately took another and then just stared into my camera screen without saying anything. I then looked at him and showed him what I caught. We sprinted back to the car and got the hell out of there. I was constantly reminding myself not to look in the rear view mirror because of the story he told me. I've always been one to be more on the skeptical side, even though I believe and have seen ghosts, because you can make yourself believe you saw something paranormal when in fact something logical happened. At first I thought it could be fog from our breath, since it was cold and we spoke right before the shot, but our breath never showed up in any of my other pictures before. On top of that, you had to exhale hard to see it well enough that night by eye and we couldn't make a cloud. That freaking big point. The other thing. It was February and cold as hell. I was thinking that the orbs could be bugs, but no bugs are alive during that time of year in my hometown. The orbs were also inconsistent when showing up. Average picture taking was something like 5 seconds. Since then I haven't been to the bridge and never will. I know this sounds corny, but there is a lot of evil you can feel there. When I was in high school, my freshman year history teacher told us that when she was growing up in the area, there were rumors of satanic cults. She told the class that they even had some sort of temple or something that got taken down. I don't think anyone really believed her. The high school was in a pretty affluent suburb of Isle Point. Years later, during the summer I had graduated from high school. I was at a friend's house and we decided to check out the woods in his backyard because he said there was an abandoned shed back there. We found the shed. It had been severely damaged by storms over the years. As we kept walking we ended up on a dead-end street lined with houses. The last 2 houses on the street were boarded up and clearly not occupied. One of those houses had a window open in the back with a small step stool placed under it. I was curious to see what was inside, so I climbed through the window while my friend waited outside. The window I climbed in through was a bedroom window. The walls of the bedroom were covered in graffiti. It was very vulgar. At first I thought it was just a bunch of religion-hating kids, because Jesus and God came up a lot in the vulgar graffiti. As I made my way through the house I went first into a bathroom down the hall. The bathroom was also covered in the same vulgar graffiti, but it also had torn up pieces of paper littering the floor. When I picked some of the paper up I noticed that they were all pages of the Bible. I left the bathroom and went into the living room and there was a huge pentagram spray painted on the wall, in addition to the vulgar graffiti that seemed to be on every wall of the house. At that point I got my friend, who was waiting outside, to come in. He was in shock that this house was so close to his and he wasn't really up for exploring, but I wanted to keep looking around. Eventually we found an attic. I went up the steps to the attic. In the attic there was a goat's, I'm assuming it was a goat, skull on the floor of the attic in the middle of another painted pentagram. After seeing that, we both left the house. A couple months later it was demolished. Wrote this in a reply to someone else, but figured I'd put it in its own comment. Pardon the sloppy writing, doing this at 4 AM. Not an urban legend, but a couple family tales. My aunt and uncle used to own this old farm property that had this amazing 3-story stone house on a hill and an in-law apartment/house my grandparents lived in, across a small field in southeastern PA not super far from Valley Forge. And my family would go up to visit every year, usually once in summer and once in winter. Well, to get to the property you had to come up this gravel driveway and walk up a path from the parking area next to the apartment, and there were motion sensor lights along the path. One year, before I was born, my mom and sisters were there in the apartment with my grandmother, and she had mentioned that she guessed my dad had showed up. He was away doing things for work and wasn't expected to be there for a few more days because the lights had came up. My mom quickly dismissed it because she knew he wouldn't be there yet, having talked with him earlier and not hearing anything come up the gravel driveway. When my grandmother insisted due to the lights is when they looked out up the hill and saw a man walking up the hill and disappear into the woods. Another time there was a big family gathering, just playing cards and such, when my dad and one of my uncles both apparently stood up and ran to the door. They both had seen a man in a union uniform walking up the hill, turn and look towards them, and then disappear into the woods. Both of those incidents happened while at the apartment. But another thing that happened is after my sisters were born, my mom and dad stayed in one of the spare bedrooms in the main house with my sisters in this attached room that connected through a Jack and Jill bathroom. My mom woke up in the middle of the night and heard a little boy saying, "Mommy," in a really long drawn out way. Think cheesy horror film. She got up and checked on my sisters and they were both sound asleep. Thinking she was dreaming or something, she went back to bed until she heard it again. It happened for a few nights and then kind of stopped, I guess. She never really explained. She talked about it with my aunt, her sister, who said she had never heard any kids or anything and dismissed it until my cousin was born. The room my sisters had stayed in became his room because it was right above and connected to the master through this weird staircase in the corner of the house. One night after my cousin was born and turned maybe 3, she heard the little boy in the same way my mom had. Went up to check on him and he was sound asleep. She talked with my grandfather about it, and being the good superstitious off the boat Irishman that he went over to check it out because my aunt was terrified. From what I've been told, my grandfather was always very open and receptive to that kind of stuff and said he felt a boy's presence and talked with the boy. The boy died in the house a long time ago and the parents couldn't stand to live there anymore, so they moved and the boy was looking for them. My grandfather basically did the whole, "It's okay, you just need to go to the light and they'll be there waiting for you." But after that no one ever heard the kid anymore. There was also a time when I was bit on the cheek by my aunt's dog around Christmas. Dog was old and going blind. I was 8 and playing with it. Didn't blame the dog. But I distinctly remember sitting there on the floor bleeding and crying when a man, maybe in his late 20s early 30s, showed up on the stairs and basically calmed me and told me it would be okay and that my dad had heard me and was coming to help. Sure enough, my dad came and took me to the hospital to get the hole the size of a quarter patched up. Years later I asked him who was there that night and he had no idea what I was talking about. I had never mentioned the man before and there was no one there who matched that description. There was however a person on both sides of my family who would have matched the description. On my mom's side she had a brother who was stillborn who would have been around that age at that time, and my dad's eldest brother who died in a car accident who would have been about that age when he died. That house scared the shit out of me at times, yet whenever I remember it, it was home to me since I moved around every 2 to 3 years as a kid. I also saw the man walking up the hill, but my encounter was just glancing him from the window of the apartment. My aunt and uncle unfortunately sold it when I was in my teens, but if I could I would buy it in a second. There was also a crashed plane at the top of the hill right at the entrance to the woods. I grew up in a small rural town in the south. There used to be a dirt road out in the middle of the woods known as Creepy Hollow. It was a stretch of road about 2 or 3 miles long. It was only a few miles outside of town, but it was isolated enough that when you were out there, you felt alone. No street lights, no houses, no sounds from town, nothing but trees and eeriness. It was known that all kinds of strange things happened out there, hence the name Creepy Hollow. I personally have been out there with friends around 2 or 3 in the morning and heard chainsaws running nearby with no visible light anywhere around, and at other times I've heard chains rattling and clanking around nearby out there. Others have claimed to see UFO type lights in the sky out there, but I never saw any of those myself. Anyway, there was one particular ghost story about that place that goes back at least a couple of generations. Many people claim to have seen it. Even the town mayor swears he saw it when he was a teenager in the early 70s. There used to be an old bridge on that dirt road. One of those old to me wooden plank with iron railing type bridges. It crossed over a creek. The water, unless flooded, was usually around 15 feet below the bridge. It was always freaky driving across this old wooden thing as it creaked and groaned as you inched your car across it. I always thought it heightened the experience of being scared out there, and I used to love going across it, lol. But for decades there has been this one ghost story about the bridge. People swear as they were going across it, they would see the ghost of a teenage boy standing near a giant tree just on the other side of the bridge. They call it a ghost because he's just standing there staring at them, and he has no legs. At least no one can ever make out legs on the figure. Some have seen him during the day, others at night in their headlights. No one that saw him ever had the nerve to stop and get out of the car and see what was up. They all freaked out and drove off. Well, about 20 years ago, long after the story had been going around for decades, a car full of teenagers were going down the dirt road, drinking, and they got to the bridge and somehow missed the bridge and drove into the creek. One guy drowned. And it turns out the guy that drowned didn't have the use of his legs and was wheelchair bound. Shortly after that, the county closed off both entrances to Creepy Hollow and tore down the bridge out there, so there is no way to access the area anymore. About 5 years ago I was back home, and a few friends and I tried to find the old dirt road on foot to walk down it. But after 20 years of growth it seems the forest has completely overtaken the old road. We knew exactly where it used to be, but at the point we went back out there you couldn't tell there was ever a dirt road there. It kind of sucks. The newer generations will only hear the old stories and never get to experience Creepy Hollow for themselves like the generations of townsfolk did before them. I'm actually one of those urban legends back in high school. I was the weird loner goth kid in the corner that wouldn't say anything and made it very clear that he was not a fan of the place. Rumors started going around that I was on the suspected school shooter watch list, the FBI was watching me, and that the principal of the school and the local police were keeping tabs on me for them. All of which matches up with the fact that the principal would take time out of his day to make sure I was having a good day. The police would also stop me regularly just walking down the street to the store and would make sure I wasn't out of it. Those quotes were their words. Fast forward to 2013, long after I'm out of high school and 3 FBI agents pick me up outside my apartment on a completely unrelated matter. Took me for coffee and started the conversation about their investigation with the fact that they had the most extensive file on me, so they figured I wouldn't jerk them around on their questions on his not a put in front of him. He had my name, phone number, address and every previous address I ever lived at plus my immediate family members. I asked him why they had that information and he confirmed a previous look into me in high school. Since that was all closed up, told my friends from high school and we all got a good laugh out of it. Turns out the only person that didn't put any faith in the rumor was my mom. Bloody Mary editor to share story. I simply didn't want to deal with the obvious ridicule one probably deserves for even sharing this story. Happy to oblige. I simply don't feel like defending myself to a million people. About 25 years ago I tried it with a girl. The closet we tried it in was pitch black. We stared into the mirror, looking where one would see their own reflection. Of course, it's pitch black, you can't see a thing in the dark. Slowly a figure shifted into view, as if light were suddenly allowing my reflection to show, though it was not my face. I'll never forget it. Sunken eyes, like a corpse, withered skin, no teeth. But when I moved my face, not sure why, I noticed the reflection followed my actions, as if it were my face. It was too dark for any light to allow anything to be seen, and I spent the next year of my life unable to walk by a mirror without triple checking and keeping eye contact until I passed it. I remember as we both exploded out of the closet together, we were trembling, and my skin/body felt tingly, like I'd been shocked lightly. Jamie, the girl, was bawling and blubbering, but eventually described what I saw without me prompting her. I don't believe in BS. I'm not a fan of lies and can't stand bullshit stories people make up for attention. However, I have years of experience dealing with the occult because of this one attempt to experiment. I've gone on to deal with some really nasty things, and to this day, I'm not a stranger to whatever they are. All I know is they don't need the night to go bump. They are the night. This manifestation, in my opinion, wasn't necessarily the Bloody Mary, but an invocation did occur, and what I saw still scares me to this day. So there was this creepy story that parents from my old town would tell their kids about this serial killer that murdered 2 boys in a public restroom at a certain park in town. Were never thought twice about writing it off as an urban legend, because 2 kids being murdered is something a city would name something after, and there's nothing in town named after 2 kids. Maybe it's happened somewhere else, maybe it's an urban legend, but it didn't happen here. We all generally thought that it was to teach us to always maintain contact with mom. A pedophile raped and murdered 2 young boys in a no longer standing building, tied them up, violated 2 boys, then slit their throats after many long hours of torturing them almost 95 years ago. As of mid-90s, there is something in town named after 2 kids 95 years ago that sound old to me now. Even our parents thought it was an urban legend. Sure enough, for a school assignment I hit the town library archives. The guy shot himself dead when the police came knocking after a very short investigation. Small town community 6000 PEOPLE****. A quick note on that. Imagine the creepiest stone building you've ever seen standing in a cemetery. Honest to fact, that's what the public restroom in question looks like. As a 5-year-old playing on that playground, it took no imagination to see an invisible graveyard around the building. I live close to a big volcano, 11,000 feet, which is a pretty cool national park. Anyways, there is a road that goes about halfway up until you hit a dead end, surrounded by forest on one side and open pasture overlooking the city. When we were in our late teens, me and my friends would head out there with many more kids to hang out at the pasture in the afternoon and check out the sunset. But as soon as the sun would set, everyone would head down quickly because there were rumors that bad shit happened if you stayed up there after dark. Never gave it much thought as it is very far away from everything, but drove down with everyone anyway because it was also very lonely. Several years ago, one of my friends and a friend of his invite me to go grab a beer at a small bar located at the start of the road. So we go there and hang out until about midnight when we decide to go home. Except my friend's friend, who was driving, asks if we want to go check out the view from the pasture. We hesitate, but yeah, sure, why not? So we go up and check out the awesome view for about 15 minutes. But then we hear two dirt bikes speeding up the road. We all got a bad feeling about it, so we hastily jump the fence and get on his pickup truck. He turns it on, and as soon as he hits the gas it stalls and dies completely. Fuck. The bikes are close now. So he tries again and it dies. I can see their lights now. He tries again, and it works this time. Thank God. He turns the truck around, and we get going. The bikes arrive and drive past us real slow with two guys on each. They did not have a friendly disposition, so we sped down, but luckily they didn't follow. About a month later, a girl and her BF stayed until late. She was raped, her BF beat up, and his car stolen. So it was true that bad things would happen if you were up there after dark. Edit. Orcs Sable. I'm going to be the anti to this story, or maybe a middle ground point. My family comes from a rural area that has a lot of weird ghost stories and spirit stories and all that. They are buried in those some places that the stories came from. I visited the most haunted crematory my family laid in and did all the tricks. Looked for the devil's doorway in the strangely unlocked crypt. It was just full of graffiti, used condoms and empty beer cans. I stalled my car on the bridge and popped it in neutral to wait for them to push me across. After pulling in, I parked my car in a place that a camera could record the gates that supposedly would try to close on you while you were in the graveyard. There was nothing in the hour of video. In the thousands of pictures I took, in the Polaroids I took, there was nothing. I went back into town and hit a local bar and got the hello, your asterisk son. How's she doing? We miss your grandma and grandma around here. I told her I went to this particular cemetery and her eyes turned pale. Oh boy, no, you don't go there. There's so few of us that visit there, no one keeps it up, and we just let those of us from there rest. I drank my PBR that tasted like copper and left. A few months later I went again. Set up cameras facing front and back in my car recording video and tried another legend from the place. I talked to my uncle who told me the portal to hell wasn't in the mausoleum, it was by the creek next to the mausoleum. I called it a crypt earlier. So this time I went, 3 cameras going. I recorded everything. I tried another car trick that is supposed to happen. I park my car, but end against a tree in the turnaround. The legend is that if you park your car against the tree, the spirits push it away. I didn't even put my parking brake on. I wandered around for a couple of hours and even ventured down into the creek that runs around the graveyard. There were no openings or portals or anything. I was so bored. I did the same routine again, going into town. The bartender told me to stay away, say hello to my parents, visit my grandparents' grave on the way home, and tell them hi, all that. Good old country shit. I did later find out that most of my batteries died after 10 minutes, so I had almost nothing from that trip. So the next time I took a friend, no battery problems, nothing. We decided to walk a path that led out of the back of the cemetery that I wouldn't do alone before. I assured him that my family is buried here, not one will be upset. So we walked this path that was supposed to be the path to where they worship Satan. Leave it to me to be surprised that it led to one big clearing and at the end of a clearing another path that led to the foundation of a couple of garages that once held large farm equipment. When we got back, there was a family of mourners at one of the graves. That's not unusual. It's still an active cemetery. So I hushed him into my car and we left without disturbing them. What was most unusual is that driving out I didn't notice another car in the graveyard or on the other side of the bridge. They took no notice of us at all when we turned up either. I started the car and we rolled away without giving it any gas, as slowly and politely as we could. When we hit the bridge I noticed there wasn't another car in the cemetery. When we got off the bridge, I noticed there wasn't a car parked in the grass to the side either. I got home and put all of my memory cards into my computer. There wasn't a single video of the people coming into the graveyard. No cars entered behind us, walked behind us or anything. I had my cameras recording the entrance the whole time. We didn't take pictures out of respect. To this day, I honestly don't know what happened. The cameras stopped recording about 10 minutes prior to our return. The limits of a digital camera at the time meant it would stop after about 30 to 45 minutes. They could have walked in then, but the lack of vehicle is what really confused me. Not saying it was ghosts, but totally spooked me out. I had plans to visit at night up until then. I'll ever go back, even in the daylight. Edit. After a couple of downvotes, I'll give away It's Orcs Sable. It's been something I grew up with that I never believed, still don't. Just a few spooky things from there. Goatman. Sort of point. Rural southeastern Wisconsin had a legend about Goatman, a sometimes naked man with a goat head on his own, who would run in the road on Hog's Back Road, trying to get people to swerve and drive off the steep drops on the sides of the very hilly road. There were a couple things at play. The first is that there were quite a few car accidents on this road. There was one particular part where there was a long uphill and then a steep drop off with a sharp right turn at the end. Just before the turn, the pavement was always super chewed up. This is because this section of road was sort of a rite of passage for teenagers in the area. It was tradition to try to get your car airborne at the steep drop off and then make that sharp right turn. That chewed up section was from cars bottoming out when they landed. The problem is that lots of new drivers would either overshoot the jump and drive off the road straight ahead, or because they were inexperienced, just forget to turn. Then, when asked how they got their car stuck up in the trees, they would repeat aspects of Goatman's MO, saying it wasn't their fault, someone made them swerve off the road. The funny thing is, that legend was based on a real thing. There was a family with a last name that started with G and has at least 2 other letters in it from the word goat. Not naming names. They had a son who has some sort of psychological issue. I'm not sure if it was schizophrenic or what the actual issue was. Apparently, before he was properly medicated or was just off his meds, he would do crazy things. Like, oh I don't know, run around in the woods behind the house at night. A woods that had a certain road running through it. But that was it. I never heard about any real stories with a goat head or any other animals, so that aspect was likely just some embellishment through the decades. A funny thing is that apparently my mom dated Goatman in high school in the 70s. And to answer your next question, no, I'm not old enough to be son of Goatman. And unfortunately, sometime in the last 5 to 15 years, they actually knocked down that fun dangerous hill, so the road is much flatter and much more boring safe.